In this exercise, I'll be explaining how to use the various settings inside the 3D Revolve Options dialog box. I'm still working away inside halfanapple.ai, which is found inside the 29-3D folder. And I've managed to take that selected path outline, which is the half an apple itself, and revolve it around a vertical axis in order to create a complete apple form. Now, it doesn't really have that much definition at this particular angle, but we can go ahead and switch that around. Now, notice that we've got these color-coded controls here, which allow you to spin the object in 3D space. So currently, for example, even though we're revolving the path outline around a vertical axis, we've gone ahead and rotated that vertical axis in 3D space so that the apple can spin back and forth. And you do that using these various controls right here. Now, rather than calling these the X, Y, and Z controls, which is a little bit misleading because they're not really listed in the conventional order, instead, I'm going to refer to them by their airplane names. So this first control is the pitch control. Notice that it's in red. And think of when you're in an airplane and you pitch forward or you pitch backward. So the wings are staying in place, but you're either nosing forward or your tail is going down, you're nosing upward. That's the pitch control. And you can either change that value numerically if you want to, or you can grab the front edge of that cube and yank it around like so. And notice that the front edge highlights red, as do the other edges that are associated with pitch. So if you end up basically spinning this guy upside down, why, then you can grab one of these other red edges in order to one day spin it back right side up, like so. And the nice thing about this cube, incidentally, is that it gives you control over a 3D object, which is what this thing is, even though you're working in 2D space. That is, you're working on a two-dimensional screen. You've got width, height, and that's all you got. And many programs make it very difficult to move around in 3D, whereas Illustrator does a pretty darn good job inside of these dialog boxes. All right, your last control, I'm going to jump ahead here, is your roll control. So imagine that that dot right there is the nose of the plane. It's coming right at you, essentially. You can roll around the nose. So if you were in the plane, if one wing dipped down and the other one went up, or the other wing dipped down and the opposite went up, then you'd be rolling back and forth. And you can control the roll not only by modifying this value, and these are measured in degrees, by the way, but you can also go ahead and drag these bottom edges here, the ones that appear blue. And that will allow you to roll that apple to your heart's content, as you can see. And then finally, you've got the yaw control, which is basically what happens when the plane spins back and forth, kind of on a spindle. So one of the wings goes forward and the other goes backward, in other words. And you can control the yaw by dragging one of the vertical edges, at least one of the edges that starts off vertical, because after all, you can spin this cube any way you want. Notice as I drag the yaw that I'm spinning the apple around its axis. So the axis stays in place when I adjust the yaw control. Whereas if I grab one of the other controls, if I change the pitch, for example, or if I end up changing the roll, in both of those cases, I'm changing the angle of that axis. So it's all stuff that you might find helpful, or you may want to just grab that cube and drag it all over the place. Now, the other option in this area is perspective, and currently it's set to 0 degrees, which means that we're looking at an isometric projection. If you want any amount of perspective whatsoever, you need to go ahead and increase that value, which becomes very useful in the 3D Extrude dialog box. Here, you can take it or leave it. You might want to add a little perspective, you might not. We're going to come back to it later. In the meantime, I want you to see this revolve control right here. This is how far you're revolving the path outline around the axis. Currently, we're revolving it all the way around, 360 degrees, which is why the apple ultimately closes around itself, and we're not seeing any of the meat. In other words, we haven't cut a slice out of that apple. However, we could cut a slice if you want to, or we could just render a slice. If I take this value down from 360 degrees to just 30 degrees, then all we'll be left with is a slice of apple and nothing more, just like this. And now you're seeing the problems that gradient fills can cause, by the way. Let's go ahead and rotate that guy around here. I'm going to change the yaw control so the apple's facing a different direction. That is the apple slice at this point in time. Notice what's happening. The stroke is peeling away from the fill is basically what we're seeing here. So when that happens to Illustrator and it can't think its way outside of this box, it ends up showing gray. which is obviously a tragic thing because that's for real. That's actually going to render gray, which is going to completely mess up the effect. And we don't want that. And you can get around these kinds of problems by not working with gradients in the first place, at least not gradient fills. You can add them after the effect by mapping them into your artwork as symbols, and we'll see how that works later. But in just a moment, we're going to get rid of that gradient fill. Now, you can turn off the cap if you want to. If you don't want to see the fill at all, then you go ahead and select this second icon right there, which gives you this effect. Now, there's no reason we'd want to do that where this apple is concerned. However, you may find a use for it in your other artwork. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and turn the cap back on. And I'm also going to set the angle value. The final angle value that I'm looking for is 270 degrees, which is 3/4 the way around a circle. Now, so long as the preview checkbox is turned on, every time you make one of these modifications, you're going to see a progress bar. Don't be surprised if you see that little not responding message for a moment. That's just Illustrator's way of messing with you. It should go ahead and successfully render out every one of these effects. Now notice that the exposed portion of the apple is facing away from us. So I've got to go ahead and grab one of those yaw controls and rotate the apple around so that I can see into it. And this should work right there. The wireframe preview can be a little difficult to interpret at times, but when we've just got a quarter slice open, it's pretty easy to see what's going on. I actually want it to look more like that, I think. And then finally, notice that you've got this sort of gap in the middle of the apple, and that's a function of the offset. Incidentally, you can increase that offset if you want to. I could take it up to 12, and that's going to give us essentially a thicker axis so that we're separating the slices of apple away from each other so that we've got this big missing core in the center. What would be nice is if I could change this offset value to something negative so that I could get rid of any vestige of a core whatsoever. But that is not an option. The lowest you can go with this control is 0, and that's what I suggest you do. But got to tell you something. For now, I suggest you actually do nothing because we've got to take care of that gradient problem. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out there. Or you can apply it if you want to. You can go ahead and click OK. Might as well. Let's do that because this is a dynamic effect. We can come back and modify it anytime we like. That's our first venture into the world of 3D Revolve inside of Illustrator. In the next exercise, we're going to clean up this apple and make it right.